welcome again. A few messages after the break. We're going to invite all the people to download the presentation early. If you didn't yet, we invite you to skip the coffee break and to go directly to the rooms, because to try to match and to set up all the presentation. Entonces invitamos a todos aquellos que no han bajado sus presentaciones todavía, que se acerquen con quien les corresponde.
And if you haven't done so yet, please skip the coffee break so you can make sure to download the presentations. So, bienvenidos esta mañana.
We have a couple of nice guys, very strong talks. Steve and Dimitri from Latin America, and Steve from our co-chair of Go On. And I'm going to invite Michelle Graco this morning to introduce our first speaker. Vamos a meter a Michelle para que nos introduzca la presentación de los presentadores. Adelante, Michelle.
Thank you. Good morning. Buenos días a todos. It's so nice, no, to mix in a little English and Spanish. I think, okay, at the end of the symposium, probably most of the people speak more Spanish. Okay, we start the second day, and we are pleased, no, to have experts from around the world sharing the lasting findings associated to ocean acidification. Today we move to UK to introduce Professor Steve Widdicombe, and that is the co-chair of the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, Go On Executive Council, and also is his Director of Science and Deputy Chief Executive of Plymouth Marine Laboratory. Professor Widdicombe, Steve, has a lot of experience, more than 30 years, in the field of observation and large experiments to address issues relating to natural and anthropogenic perturbance in ecological and particularly benthic systems. And he has the particular interest to quantify the effect of this anthropogenic disturbance in the systems. Recently, he is concentrated on the impact of human-induced stressors, such as climate change, ocean acidification, and artificial light on marine organisms and ecosystems. He participated in several national and foreign projects. He's part of the program NERC, and in particularly, I want to thank you very much because Steve is part of the International Scientific Committee, and during the 2 years, he was very enthusiastic with many suggestions that make more successful this event. Thank you, Steve, and bienvenido to el quinto Simposio Internacional de un Océano en Alto CO2.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for braving the early start and being here this morning. Very much appreciated. Thank you for the very kind introduction, and thank you for describing my inputs as enthusiastic. And we often know what enthusiastic means, don't we? I was a bit of a pain in the backside, I think is probably what it means. But I hope hopefully some of it was constructive anyway. So this morning's talk focuses on the global ocean acidification observing network, but primarily as a segue into talking about the UN Ocean Decade. And it was fantastic to hear Prince Albert yesterday sort of encourage and endorse the concept of us engaging with the Ocean Decade. I mean, and what hopefully I'll be able to provide from this talk is some practical sort of steps in how we might be able to, as individual researchers, start to get involved and align the work we do with the spirit and the concepts of the Ocean Decade. But I think, yes, there we go. So I'm just going to follow it on my own screen here as well, because I noticed that with the screen here, I don't want to turn my back and you always be looking at my back. Not least because it's not that I don't want you to see my face, I'm just worried there might be a target on my back, so I'll just keep facing. But anyway, so like all good future projections, I think what I'd really like to do is set the context with a bit of a hindcast. So from my particular story, it goes a little bit further back than this. So it was, I remember quite clearly back in 2004 at the very first high CO2 meeting back in Paris in UNESCO, when a very sort of young and emerging ocean acidification community started to come together. I mean, primarily talking about issues such as the deep water sequestration of CO2 and the impacts that could have. But what's been really clear in the various meetings as we've gone along from Monaco to Monterey to Hobart and now to here, that there's been enormous growth in the community, not just in the size and the diversity of those of us who are within it, but also the ambition and the scale of the work that we're aspiring to do. So around 10 years ago, sort of in reflecting some of that ambition, it was clear to us as a community that the amount of work that we're doing would really benefit from an ability to sort of share and coordinate and collaborate at a global scale. Ocean acidification is a global phenomenon, and we really wanted to be able to provide that synergy. So after meetings initially in Seattle and then in St. Andrews, the community itself self-organized into a network, a kind of support group for each other to share our experiences and move the work along much more quickly. And that's when GOAN was born, the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network. Initially, around 150 scientists from 30 countries. Fast forward 10 years, and GOAN has increased enormously. We now have a membership of around 900 scientists and actors within the ocean acidification research community from 114 countries. So with that comes sort of a great opportunity in terms of communication, organization, exerting power and influence over decision makers to allow the community to deliver the impact that it's really looking to deliver. But what holds the network together? Well, primarily the network, as we said, is a collaborative international network. You know, it's not a project that's like is there to sort of tell everyone what to do. GOAN has always been an organization that is created by its members, for its members. And what GOAN strives to do is reflect the ambition and the needs and the requirements of those people within it. But what really brings us together as a network is focusing around the three main goals. Oh, it's not gone on, sorry. There we go. The three main goals, which kind of are the glue that holds us together as a coherent, coordinated network. The first one is about improving our understanding of the global ocean acidification conditions. So where is it happening? How fast is it happening? Why is it happening? The second one is about improving our understanding of ecosystem response. So if chemical changes are happening in the ocean, what is the consequence of that for the biological systems that live within our oceans and coasts, but also those human societies that depend on those ecosystems? And the third goal is around being able to understand what the future may look like. So to create projections to allow us to be able to respond, to adapt, to get ourselves ready for those kind of changes. But also to try and provide influence to prevent some of the worst of the changes that we perhaps can see coming down the track. So I imagine many of you in this room will fit into maybe one, maybe even all of these categories. So GOAN as a network remains there for you. So I would encourage you to become engaged in that network. But ocean acidification is far from just being a global phenomenon. We appreciate that it's happening everywhere. But we also have heard from talks already this week and from previous work at previous conferences, previous high CO2 meetings, that the regional specificity of not only the rates at which ocean acidification is happening, but also the impacts are highly specific to the regions and the context within which they're occurring. And not just in terms of the biological context, but also the socio-economic and geopolitical context of what is happening in particular areas. Which is why at GOAN, we try to arrange ourselves and support these regional hubs, ways in which local communities can aggregate and work together to address the issues and the context that is of most relevance to them. It's obvious that a one-stop shop or a one-fits-all organization for everyone around the world is not going to address those kind of regional needs and interests that we have to be mindful of in order to actually allow our science to create impact on the ground. So as you see, we currently have 9 regional hubs within the GOAN family. There are a couple of hubs we're looking to grow, and we're in conversation with people who are looking to lead on those. But what I would emphasize about the hubs is that they are not controlled by the GOAN network. They actually have the freedom to create the environment which suits the members that exist within those regional hubs. What GOAN does is then allows tries to support them in delivering their aims and ambitions, and provides them with an opportunity to then come together, learn from each other, and operate then at a global scale as well. So that was a little bit about GOAN, and if you want to learn a lot more about what we do as a network, I'll point you towards Jan Newton's talk, which is just after the plenaries today. Jan is a co-chair of GOAN, and she'll explain a little bit more about what it is the network strives to do and how it can help you and how you can be part of that family. Visit the booth as well, which is out here. Talk to people involved. And also just remember that GOAN is an open network for the benefit of its members. Okay? So it's about addressing the needs of the community. So what are the next steps then for GOAN and for us as an OA community itself? And clearly the direction of travel is around undertaking the science in order to play a strong part in creating change. We've gone beyond the state that we do science merely because we enjoy it. We all do it because we love it and enjoy it. But really we want to be creating make a difference. Which then brings us on to, thank you. Oh, I knew it might have been a mistake to do this, but anyway, so go and see Jan, visit the GOAN booth, and remember we're an open network. Right. So, which brings us on to the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainability. And we've had a lot of talk about what that actually is, and there still is a lot of confusion, I think, in the community about how do we actually engage with something. It seems so vast and so conceptually high level. It seems like a very great idea, but what does it actually mean for us as a community? Well, I think it's worth remembering where the concept of the UN Ocean Decade came from. And if we go back to the World Ocean Assessment in 2016, where it was stated that humanity is running out of time to manage the ocean sustainably, it was clear that something needed to be done. And it did spur the UN into action in terms of generating this concept of the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And what I would urge you to remember is it isn't the Decade of Ocean Science. Okay? Yes, we're going to do great science, but the important thing is it's about for sustainable development. It's about creating a change, creating a difference. And that's reflected in the vision for the UN Decade, which is the science we need for the ocean we want. It's not the science we want. And there is a very important difference between those two statements. And the mission of the decade is about undertaking transformative ocean science, to find solutions for sustainable development, connecting people and our ocean, okay? It's not about incremental change. It's about really thinking differently about how we do our science and the benefits that that science can generate. So what was Goan's response to this? Well, we saw the call from the UN Ocean Decade, and we felt that ocean acidification as a community needed a strong voice within this UN decade. So what Goan did was, on behalf of the ocean acidification community, we submitted a program to the UN Decade, which was subsequently endorsed by the UN. And I think it's really important that I will emphasize this point time and time again, that OARS is not Goan. Equally, Goan does not own OARS. We proposed it on behalf of the community. OARS is effectively yours. And what we're looking to do within Goan is provide support and guidance to allow the community to engage with the Ocean Decade through the concept of the OARS program. So if you look at some of the things we put in our proposal, it's about fostering the co-development of ocean acidification science, including the impacts of marine life and sustainability of marine ecosystems in estuarine, coastal, open ocean environments. It's about to facilitate activities that deliver against the SDG target 14.3, which is about minimizing and addressing the impacts of ocean acidification. So in essence, if I was going to sum up what OARS is all about, I would consider these four C's. And the spirit of the OARS program or organization is around collaboration, but collaboration across all levels and all players in the ocean acidification community. You know, we are just a fraction of that community. We are the science element of it. But in order to deliver against the aspirations of the decade, we need to expand that community to include far more actors and players. In terms of sort of academia and research, we need to reach out to other disciplines, to engineering, to social sciences. We need to reach out to policymakers and actors in the field, in NGOs and anyone who could have a general interest in this kind of activity. It's important that we engage in capacity building across both science, but also in impact generation, so that people are equipped and empowered to create the science and the impact wherever they are and in whichever context they're working. It's not enough for the science to be held within a small number of scientists in a small number of institutes in a small number of countries. We need to democratize that process. We need to co-design the work we do. So we need to implement observation and research to address the threat of ocean acidification in partnership with those people who are going to require the evidence and the knowledge that we generate. And it's about communication. It's about ensuring that as a broad community, we understand each other. We understand each other's perspectives, our needs, and it's about translating across those boundaries and breaking those boundaries down. It's about changing the way, as scientists, we think about the way we do our research. You know, we are, and I am the same. I'm very quick to think about what it is I'm going to do, about what that next great piece of science is, because science, let's face it, is really cool, and we love doing it. We need to switch it around and think about, why am I doing something? What is the purpose of the activity I undertake? And it's not about writing a cool paper. It's what motivates me to do this? What do I want to change? And within OARS, we've adopted this theory of change approach where we start with the idea of what are the benefits that we're trying to achieve. And then we work back towards, well, if we know where we want to go, we can work out the steps we need to take to get there. And it's really important, given the fact that the issue is so pressing and urgent, and the resources are, quite frankly, so limited, that we make sure we have very clear sight of where we want to go, so that when we set out on that journey, we are going in the right direction, and we are going together as well and helping each other along that journey. The kind of ethos behind this we tried to capture within a paper which is in press in the IC's Journal of Marine Research. So have a little look at that one when it's out and available. So in the spirit of the theory of change, within the OARS program, we've identified 7 outcomes. And here you remember, I specifically say outcomes, not outputs. This is a descriptor of what we want the future to look like. And by the end of the ocean decade, what we are hoping is that effectively these statements will be true. Currently, they are far from true. But with the work that we hope to encourage the community to do over the next 10 years, we hope at the end of the decade we'll be able to stand here and we will be able to say that the global science community is equipped to provide the ocean acidification data that we need, that the data and evidence needs are well understood, that local, regional and global ocean observing systems have been co-designed and implemented by a broad suite of actors, that we understand the risks and consequences and impacts on marine systems, and we all have access to accessible, societally relevant predictions and projections of what ocean acidification conditions are likely to be. And equally, that we've brought the public on board, and the public is now recognizes not only the issues and threats of ocean acidification, but what they can do to be part of the solution space. And that there is a wide adoption of the science that we do, international and international policy, because we can produce all the amazing evidence in the world, but unless it hits the ground in legislation and in decision-making, then it will sit and just gather dust in academic papers, and we won't deliver the change that we really want. Now, we know that as a community, we're not going to deliver this all ourselves. We don't have the time, effort, resources. But equally, if we look out there into the seascape of projects around the UN Ocean Decade, and also in sort of marine relevant activities, there are a suite of partners and programs who actually share many of the ambitions that we do, but maybe for a different drive or a different stressor, or they have a particular focus on a different activity. And in order for OARS to be successful, and for us as a community to be successful, we really need to engage with all of these players. And it's not about taking control of ocean acidification research, but often it's about ensuring that our voice as the ocean acidification community ends up in the conversations that these programs are also having, and spreading our expertise and knowledge, and using the expertise of these programs to deliver against our desired outcomes. So what have we done so far? It was endorsed a year ago, so what have we been doing for the past year? Well, I'm delighted to say that for each of those outcomes, we have identified some co-champions who are picking up the baton and looking to try and coordinate some thinking time around each of those outcomes. We've provided those champions with the theory of change training, because for many of us, the theory of change framework is not something that we perhaps had a lot of experience in doing. We're establishing outcome working groups because we want to get as much input from the community as possible. As part of that, we are developing a series of outcome white papers which will try to encapsulate for each of those outcomes what the future direction of travel needs to be in order for us to achieve that outcome. We're looking to engage more strongly with more partners and stakeholders, and creating community awareness of the OARS concept and spirit. And in terms of raising awareness, there's a lot of text on here I won't expect you to read, but we've been very active in processes such as the UNFCCC COP in Glasgow, the recent UN Ocean Conference, and also we will be engaging at the UNFCCC COP27. And I know what you say, what good does that do for ocean acidification research on the ground? But these people are going to be key enablers in allowing us to be able to be successful. We are going to require an open door into policy. So what is key is that we engage with policymakers, not only from the very top, but all the way down through into local levels. And what we can do as a UN-endorsed program, and also, and to some extent, a network such as GOAN, it gives us the reputation and the gravitas to be able to open the doors and have conversations with these people. So whilst this isn't the only way policy becomes, that we interact with policy, it's certainly one of the really important ones to do. So delivering these outcomes, what does it look like? We talked about building up the community to allow us to be able to get as much input and represent as many different thoughts and ideas and inputs as possible. So I've already mentioned the co-champions who kind of sit at the center of this OARS outcome. But I would also point your attention down here to stakeholders. You know, we talked about co-development a lot. But if we are developing solutions and if we are trying to drive impact, the stakeholders, those who are going to require our work, need to be at the very start of that conversation. So the reason we put them down there is it's the point at which the onion grows, but it also connects with every particular layer on the outside of this onion. Then as we grow the community, we see the working group appears around the outside of the co-champions. Then we engage with more broadly and wider with more experts and specialists, and then hopefully with delivery partners who will actually deliver the work on the ground. And I call for the community to think about getting engaged in all layers of this onion. So these are entry points in which you can start to be part of the OARS conversation. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the OARS outcomes themselves. And if you forgive me, I'll read some of the words out because we've been engaging with the outcome champions to try and encapsulate the vision that they have for each of the outcome areas. But I just remind you again, what we're talking about here is defining what the future is going to look like, and then considering what are the key steps we are going to need to take to get on to get towards that. So I'm going to start with outcome 1. And our co-champions here actually is Kim Curry and Richard Feely. So if this is an area you're interested in, please talk to them. But clearly our scientific community needs to provide the world with the ocean acidification data and synthesis products of known quality needed to allow us to determine the progress and the trends of ocean acidification throughout the world's oceans. Enabling OA observers to provide such data and knowledge will benefit local communities and will also contribute to a global understanding. As we strive for greater integration of individual observing programs and efforts from across the world, we will need to ensure we are providing data that is of known quality. So the themes, the kind of activities that we're starting to explore within this outcome are around increasing the quality and quantity and coverage of ocean acidification measurements, contributing to sustained observations, providing the infrastructure for the submission and archiving of quality controlled data within global, national and regional data centers, providing the ocean acidification data products required to support the needs of end users, and increasing the community's capacity and capability to measure and observe the ocean in terms of ocean acidification, and communicate and collaborate with those key partners that we've explored a little bit already. And as I said, if you provide, use, rely have an interest in ocean acidification data, do please get involved. Talk to Kim and Richard and work out how it is that you might be able to contribute to this activity. Outcome 2, specific data and evidence needs for the mitigation and adaptation strategies from local to global will be clearly identified and provided. For ocean knowledge to actually be used, it has to be relevant and understood. And for data to be relevant, it has to be gathered and interpreted from the perspective of the user. The knowledge needs from across a range of stakeholders, from the public, industry, managers, regulators, policymakers, needs to be identified and understood. Understanding that can then guide the data providers and facilitate the co-production of comprehensible and usable knowledge that will optimize action for societal mitigation and adaptation to ocean acidification. So we're looking to map out where ocean acidification knowledge sits in the decision-making space. Develop the tools that are required for us that allow us to implement that data, but also allow policy to be effective. Optimize translation of science and to accelerate the uptake of that science by key stakeholders. Again, co-designing novel methods to streamline the route from a stakeholder need to a stakeholder then being able to take action, as well as establishing the key metrics that allow us to understand whether we have actually been successful in the implementation of that action. So for all of you who are interested in creating that kind of science to policy or knowledge activity, please get involved with our co-champions, Richard Bellaby, who is here in this room, Jesse Turner, who can't be with us this week, but reach out to them. They very much like to hear from you. Outcome 3. So OA observing will not be effectively performed in isolation from either other ocean observing activities and networks or from stakeholders and interested parties. The world already spends a large amount of time, effort and money, perhaps not as much as we'd like, but it is quite a lot, observing marine systems, and there is an urgent need for better coordination and collaboration to generate greater efficiencies for the resources already available and more effective use of additional resources as they become available. So there's a host of things here. It's about building capacity, not only for us as practitioners, but also for the funders, implementing the co-building and co-design of sustainable multi-parameter systems, observing systems, but also using the infrastructure that's already available. Ensuring CO2 is embedded within those systems and at least 2 of the parameters are there. Considering the principles of fair and care data production and handling. Development of low-cost sensors to build capacity and democratize the act of observing the system, and common and mutually agreed upon knowledge base to support international policy debate and science. So if you're interested in integrated systems, again, please reach out. Martine is here, happy to hear your thoughts and ideas, and Veronique, who will be arriving later in the week for the Upwelling conference, which is after this one. Outcome 4, understanding the marine biology implication, or the marine system implications. Now, biology is central to ocean acidification work. I would say that, I'm a biologist, so just allow me that one, please. But I feel as it connects chemical changes to the societal impacts and consequences that actually matter for people. It forms one half of the climate biodiversity nexus. But the complexity of marine biological response is often underestimated, and it's critical we increase our ability to capture this complexity, not just through space and time, but also through the complex biological and social systems that marine ecosystems represent. But it should also be stated that despite there being a lot of things we still do not know about biological impact, we do now know enough to act. And we should move forward on actions in parallel with efforts to increase our biological understanding. So again, in terms of the themes that our co-champions are considering exploring, and one of our co-champions is here, Sam DuPont, who many of you will know, but also in collaboration with Frank Muller-Karger and Gabrielle Canonica, who actually representatives from the Marine Life 2030 UN Decade Programme. Because this is a really important way we reach out to another biological community that perhaps we haven't really engaged with so far. So we need to identify where the biological knowledge is most urgently needed to support solution-orientated actions. Understand the current state of biological knowledge capabilities and work out where the missing pieces are. But as I said, not use this as an excuse not to act now. We need creative and innovative ways to fill those gaps. New technologies, new capabilities, eDNA, AI, machine learning to increase the speed and scope at which we can collect biological information. Transdisciplinary teams that take biologists out of their comfort zone and interacting with those key players who bring a different perspective. We need to stimulate adaptive actions that are iterative so that the knowledge and the actions co-develop together. So again, please get involved. So time, how am I doing for time?
Continue. We have on time.
Oh, okay. So, outcome 5. There's only 3 more outcomes to go, so you'll be pleased, as you know. So outcome 5, well, ocean predictions and projections on the local scale to support decisions will require us to employ new technologies such as things like digital twins, machine learning, high-resolution local predictions, and regional Earth system models. They need to be equitably delivered for all ocean users to support adaptation and mitigation plans by 2030. The inclusion of these ocean predictions and projections into everyday life will result in a more climate-savvy public, changing people's behaviours, increasing public stakeholder academic awareness, expanding knowledge and perceptions, and contributing to the UN SDGs. The data will allow for mitigation of climate change impacts on coastal communities, as well as the natural environment like coastal acidification driven by eutrophication, by examining scenarios within these tools to develop more realistic plans for management within that multi-stressor framework. The production of these projections and associated data products will enable better marine resource management decisions. So effectively, we're looking to create the capability to allow those projections of future conditions and impacts to be placed in the hands of the people that really need it. And again, our co-champions are here. We have already heard this week from Sam Sidlecki, but also Richard Bellaby is a co-champion on this one again. Please engage with our co-champions and give them your thoughts and ideas in this space. Outcome 6, and this is perhaps something that we really need to strengthen in terms of our activities as a community. In terms of making public awareness. So to efficiently respond to the threats of ocean acidification, we need literate societies. Humans are only inspired to act on issues that they know and understand, even if it's only an understanding at a rudimentary level. Public attitudes provide the impetus and the momentum needed to initiate and drive through change. It's critical that if we are to deliver impacts, the public need to be with us on that journey, and they need to be part of that solution, not people we go to and tell them what to do or tell them what is happening. They need to be part of our considerations from the very start. And within this outcome, we're seeking to inspire and encourage innovative and unconventional tools to overcome the barriers in teaching and informing OA. That could be focusing on key take-home messages, but I've already seen a couple of talks this week about how we're engaging with new ways of bringing the public into our space and entering into theirs as well. And it's critical to look into systemic inequities embedded within the field of OA and environmental education to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion across the whole piece. 5 minutes, okay? Yep, nearly there. So, sorry. I meant to mention Abed is here. There's Abed. And Geraldine Fabel, who are the co-champions, and very eager to talk to you about your thoughts and ideas around this. So the final outcome is around what we talked about, engaging with policy, to ensuring that our knowledge, thank you, ensuring our knowledge and our our expertise actually lands in the places where action is going to be driven. So meaningful action on ocean acidification requires investment and support from governing agencies. This outcome seeks to strengthen policy and governance frameworks to support effective action. We need scientists and policymakers to work together to ensure that the best available science is incorporated in strong policy and management decisions. To do this, we need a network of scientists and managers to come together at local, regional, and international scales to identify needs and design the best solutions together. We need to build trust and confidence between scientists and decision makers to allow robust evidence-based decisions to become normal practice. And again, there's a suite of thoughts here that we're starting to explore. And Alexis, who is here today as well, is taking a lead on this, as well as Nick Hardman-Mountford from the Commonwealth Secretariat, who both have enormous experience in this kind of activity. But again, we need your thoughts and input. So what comes next? Well, we need to further develop and refine the outcome white papers, and that's a place where we would like you to engage. We need your advice, your experience, your opinions, your wisdom. We need to build this ocean community way beyond who we are here. And from that, we need enthusiasm, we need commitment, we need openness, we need engagement to allow that community to build. Importantly, you guys are the ones who are actually going to deliver the projects and the activities which actually contribute to the success of OARS. So we still need people to be delivering new projects and new activities. So we need innovation, creativity, dedication, and expertise. And it's important that we embrace the spirit of what OARS is trying to achieve in terms of creating action from the very start. And we need to engage with the broader seascape of partners such as the other decade programs. If you have projects that are in the spirit of OARS, it's possible to get endorsement through the UN Ocean Decade, which might allow you to gain momentum and create greater reputation for the activities you do. And then in the last round of Decade Actions call, a number of projects sought and obtained UN Decade endorsement. And we will be working with those projects to try and help deliver against the OARS outcomes. There is another call for Decade Actions which opens in October, and if you're interested in thinking about some of the projects you are currently doing or looking to develop and wonder how they can fit in with the decade, please talk to us and we will help you through that endorsement process. So 15th of October is the date to remember. As we engage more widely with the community, OARS has a session at the Effects of Climate Change on the World's Oceans Conference in Bergen in April next year. And again, we're soliciting presentations from people, thank you, Jan, from people who are actively engaged in any kind of activity which is pertinent to the 7 OARS outcomes. So come along and share your experiences and your activities within each of those outcomes. But remember, the focus is on science and impact activities that will support change. Yep, 1 minute. I'm nearly there, I promise. I will hold you up no longer. So, this is my final slide. How can I be part of the Ocean Decade and help make OARS a success? Okay. Provide input to the developing white papers. Talk to the champions. We are hoping that there will be a community consultation process with the draft white papers that you can put your thoughts and ideas in. This is not about our ideas. It's about everyone's ideas, because all the best ideas are out there. We realize we don't have a monopoly on good ideas. Undertake projects and activities that create outputs and engagements that contribute to the OARS outcome. So when you're thinking about the work you're doing, try to align it with the spirit of creating outcome and creating solutions and creating change. Think about where you want to be, what your vision is, and then work out how you're going to get there. Which is about adopting the Ocean Decade spirit to deliver that transformational change. Think about outcomes rather than outputs. And overall, act as ambassadors and leaders in ocean acidification research and OARS itself, encouraging others to contribute to those outcomes from whatever field they might be in. Spread the word about ocean acidification research, and that we are an open community and we want people to come and work with us as we want to work with them to deliver those shared ambitions. So with that, might have just squeaked in time, but you will see a number of people here with OARS t-shirts on and OARS being mentioned at the time. Please talk to us, communicate with us, come and talk. OARS is not us. OARS is all of you, all of us, and even many people beyond the system. OARS is not really a program of a group of people doing things. It's a spirit, it's a way of looking at the science we do. It's a mechanism by which we can get the very most out of what we do as ocean scientists. So please, come and be part of it with us. Thank you very much. Sorry, I've taken up far too much time.
Everything's so clear? Yeah? Okay, Sam.
I might put the question straight back to you, Sam.
Great job, Steve. I hope the community will respond to the call and that we'll have more and more people working on that. For me, it was interesting because even if I've been part of this, it's only this day that I really captured the beauty of it. And we had a first meeting, and that really made a huge difference. But something I was wondering is, I'm not sure we talked a lot about it, it's about time. Because the fact that we talk about action, time is critical. As you said at the beginning, it started because we don't have time. So how do you imagine, as a community, we will address the question of the timing of implementation will be critical to defining the priority. So if there is a solution, but it takes 20 years to make it happen, that's not a solution. No. So what's your vision in a way in how to include time in the thinking we're going to have to do?
Okay. There is a pressing need to get on as quickly as possible with this. But what I would also urge people to do is often, we make plans in haste and then we repent at great leisure. Is often the pressures of acting quickly can sometimes make us make the wrong decisions. I would urge everyone, and it's what we've been trying to do within OARS, is actually take that step back and say, okay, let's clearly think about where we want to be before we start diving into things. Yes, there's things that we already know that we have to be getting on with urgently, yesterday. But let's also give ourselves that time to think clearly about how am I going to achieve what it is I want to achieve, and not just rush into the first thing because we think it's most appropriate. I also think that these outcomes aren't going to, that we set out to start with in terms of the activities that are part of them, are going to stand the test of time for 10 years. They will need to be dynamic, they will need to be refreshed, the community will need to keep an eye on them and go, you know what, we've done that, or that didn't quite work, or we need to come back and refresh those. And it's almost the iterative process we talk about, the way in which we engage with policy and actions. As we learn more, we refine the goals that we set, and we think about the ways in we're getting there. So you're absolutely right. Time is critical, but time spent thinking hard about where we're going is not time wasted. And also, let's be iterative and allow the actions, the outcomes, and our abilities to co-evolve.
Well, the science we need for the ocean we want, powerful. And all this idea of we need actions, to connect multidisciplinary science with society to make solutions. And now we move it to a notion that is very interesting, el Mar de Grau, and this in Peru, one of the most exciting upwelling places, and a natural laboratory to study also ocean acidification. And it's a pleasure for me to present Dr. Dimitri Gutiérrez. Director of Research in Oceanography and Climate Change of the Peruvian Marine Research Institute, Instituto del Mar del Perú, IMARPE. As a biological oceanographer, his studies have been focused on benthic response to natural and human-induced hypoxia, effect of climate variability of the marine productivity, and subsurface oxygenation in the coastal southeastern Pacific. He also worked with paleoproxies and in situ data analysis, and recent spatial and temporal changes on the Peruvian upwelling as related to global trend. Dr. Gutiérrez is developing several adaptation projects for the impact of climate change on the Peruvian fisheries and marine coastal ecosystem. He leads also a graduate program of marine science here in the University Peruana Cayetano Heredia, and he's member of the IOC UNESCO Global Ocean Oxygen Network GON. And thank you very much, Dimitri. Thank you for all the support of you and IMARPE for the successful of this event.
Okay, good morning to everyone. And first of all, I want to say thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this meeting. It's an honor for me to have this opportunity to join you. And my talk intends to provide an overview of the Northern Humboldt Current system in terms of the low pH and low oxygen conditions, but also in terms of the high productivity and how all of this relates with climate variability and climate change. Well, I want to acknowledge some of the colleagues of IMARPE and universities who supported me with a lot of information for building this talk. So today I will try to develop these 4 points. First of all, to take a rapid look on the productivity, low oxygen and low pH in the Northern Humboldt Current system, the main features of this system, what are their physical forcings, and after that we will review some research and local monitoring efforts of pH and other carbon system variables, and potential biological impacts. Finally, we will discuss a little bit trends, projections, and potential scenarios for ocean acidification in the Northern Humboldt Current system. And finally, I will give some ideas about gaps, challenges, and opportunities related with this field of research. Well, as you may know already, the Northern Humboldt Current system, which can also be named as the Southeastern Tropical Pacific region, is a hotspot of oxygen deficiency and low pH. And this is very clear from the maps that I'm showing you here on top. We have the dissolved oxygen concentrations in the oxygen minimum zones in the global ocean. And below, it is the average pH values for the top 50 meters in the water column. And you can see that there is a very clear similarity in the distribution of these OMZs and the low pH regions. And in fact, the main OMZ regions in the world, as in the Eastern Tropical Pacific, this part of the Arabian Sea, and also, but with less intensity in Western Africa, are areas where the pH is lower. So why is this happening in our particular case? Here on top we can see the distribution of the chlorophyll A content in color, and in contours we can look at the oxygen content in the Pacific. So the idea is that this very high productivity leads to very strong export production, and this export production causes very enhanced oxygen consumption and oxygen depletion in the water column, and on the other hand, it also leads to a high CO2 production in the water column, and this contributes to the acidity of these water bodies, and we can further see these features by looking at the CO2 fluxes between the ocean and atmosphere on the left side. And you can see that in the Eastern Pacific, there is a very clear source of CO2 to the atmosphere. But at the same time, this region is characterized by having a very strong nitrogen deficit. And this is because there are nitrogen loss processes that are related with very strong respiration rates that are developed in the water column as a result of the high rates of export production. So at the end, these very enriched CO2, CO2-enriched waters are advected upwards through upwelling, and that explains, in part at least, the acidity of the coastal waters along the Peruvian region that we were explaining. So we can now look at a bit more detail about the water masses and circulations in this region. And in this 3D figure, you can distinguish the different water masses by the colors. So if we go from the intermediate waters to the surface, we have the Antarctic intermediate waters that are dominant below 500 meters of water depth. And then on top of that, you have the equatorial subsurface waters. This water mass is very related with the oxygen minimum zone in the Eastern Pacific. And in the surface, you have the subtropical surface waters, which have very high salinity values. And in the north, the fresher tropical surface waters and equatorial surface waters. And on the other hand, the currents structure here are rather complex. There are equatorial currents, the Peruvian coastal current and the Humboldt current, which is offshore. But in the subsurface, you have the presence of the Peru-Chile undercurrent, which actually transports these oxygen-depleted waters from the north to the south. And along its path, it is becoming more and more oxygen-depleted. Okay, so that was the big picture of the hydrography in the region, but this hydrography is modified or modulated by equatorial and regional forcing mechanisms. The Walker circulation is one of the main players here because it controls the thermocline tilt across the Pacific Basin. So when the Walker circulation is strong, the thermocline depth in the eastern boundary is very shallow, which is what occurs during La Niña, for example. But during El Niño, when the Walker circulation is weak, this thermocline deepens along the South America. And the main mode of variability of the water circulation actually occurs at the intra-annual timescales, but also at intra-seasonal timescales. On the other hand, at the regional level, we have the activity of the South Pacific high-pressure cell, which controls the strength of the wind field along the Peruvian and Chilean coasts, and which are ultimately responsible of the upwelling, of the coastal upwelling in this region. These regional forces has their main modes of variability at synoptic and seasonal timescales, and you can see here, for example, in this little square here, the annual cycle of the wind stress in the South Pacific region, which clearly shows that during winter and spring, these winds are stronger. But equatorial forcing also modulate the subsurface circulation in the region. Actually, there are 3 subsurface currents reaching the eastern part of the Pacific in the equatorial band. You have the equatorial undercurrent and the primary and secondary subsurface countercurrents. And these currents transport relatively oxygen-poor waters, but not as oxygen-poor waters than the ones that exist along the Peruvian and northern Chilean coast. So these currents feed on the Peru-Chile undercurrent, which actually is the main current of the whole system. It's very interesting because we name the region as the Humboldt Current system, but actually the contribution of the Peru-Chile undercurrent is really important in terms of the upwelling, in terms of the transport, in terms of the ventilation of the oxygen minimum zone, and etc. So here we have a cross-section for the central Peruvian coast, and this is the distance to the coast. And you can see that from about 50 meters water depth to 400 meters water depth, the fluxes are poleward, and this is due to the Peru-Chile undercurrent. And the water mass that is involved in this transport is the equatorial subsurface waters that I mentioned before. And this undercurrent is, as I said, fed by these near equatorial subsurface currents. Okay, so what about the temporal behavior of the whole system? We have annual cycles, and these annual cycles are mainly controlled by the upwelling strength, as I said. And so there are clear seasonal signatures of the coastal upwelling, the productivity, chlorophyll A, but also about the oxycline depth. In this figure, for example, we can see the seasonal cycle of the productivity by using its proxy, as a proxy, the chlorophyll A, where you can see that the productive season is summer, actually, summer to early fall, but the wind intensity peaks during winter and spring. So there is an out-of-phase behavior between winds and the productivity, and this seems to be because of the light limitation and perhaps deeper mixing of the water column and less insolation during this period of winter. In this particular upwelling region of the Northern Humboldt Current system, you have this out-of-phase behavior between upwelling and the productivity, which is very different to the situation of other upwelling systems in the world. But what about the oxygen? Here we are comparing the climatology of temperature in the water column in the coastal band of Peru and the climatology of oxycline. And you can see that the oxycline actually exhibits a semi-annual signature. It has 2 periods where it is shallower. The main period is during summer, but the other one is during spring. So this summer shoaling of the oxycline is probably related with this high productivity period, which enable a high particle export and high oxygen consumption in the subsurface waters. So I'm saying all of this just to give a very rapid outline of the complexity of the system, because the ocean acidification or the ocean acidity in this region occurs within this very dynamic context. So besides the seasonal variability, there is, of course, the interannual variability, which is modulated by the ENSO cycle, and long time series, for example, related with the oxycline depth or the chlorophyll A content in the coastal waters of Peru, shows clearly the imprint of El Niño by deepening, for example, the oxycline, while La Niña tends to shoal the oxycline. And during El Niño, also the productivity tends to go down. And during neutral or La Niña periods, the productivity in terms of chlorophyll A content goes up. Okay, so now I will review what we know at this point about the carbon cycle, CO2 fluxes, and acidification in this region. Probably I have omitted some key literature, but this is what I could explore, and forgive me if I omitted something that was really key. But to my knowledge, one of the oldest studies that described the pH variability in the region was this by Simpson and Zirino in 1980. They determined strong cross-shore gradients of pH, finding values as low as 7.8, but farther offshore, they found values as high as 8.5. And they related these very high pH values to the occurrence of algal blooms. And in this figure, for example, you can see that in this right side of the transect, the highest pH value occurs when the chlorophyll content reaches values of about 30 milligrams per cubic meter, which is a lot. Other studies like Copin, Montague, and Humboldt of 1994, they describe the same gradients, but also they found and they described the relationship between low pH values in the subsurface waters with a high seawater partial pressure of CO2 and high contents of dissolved inorganic carbon. A more recent study by Frederick et al. 2008, they determined very high PCO2 values in the coastal waters of Peru, and determined that the highest values are actually found closer to the coast, and they determined that net signature of the exchange of CO2 between the ocean and the atmosphere was a kind of source signature because of the very high contents of dissolved inorganic carbon in the water column, and which is advected by upwelling to the sea surface. Locally in Peru, the first published study was by León in 2011. They were based on 3 years of observations. They used onboard measurements in research cruises. And for example, they produce a map like this, which is for the spring of 2009, where you can find that some spots where the pH goes as low as 7.6 or 7.7, especially in the main upwelling cell related with Pisco and San Juan in the central southern part of Peru. They also characterized the mesoscale variability of pH, PCO2, chlorophyll A, and dissolved oxygen in an area in the central northern part of Peru, and they could observe these a lot of structures related with the activity of the upwelling or related to the occurrence of algal blooms. Well, here what we are showing is a frequency distribution of total alkalinity values and pH in the water column, taking into account the top 1,000 meters of water depth, and only in the surface. And one thing that I think is interesting here is that for the surface, you can notice a bimodal distribution. There is a mode at about 8.1 to 8.2, and there is another mode at about 7.9. And it seems that the low pH mode is related with the upwelling, very coastal upwelling region, while the high pH mode is related with the subtropical surface waters, whose pH values are more on the average of the global ocean. And if we can just take a rapid look at the profiles of dissolved oxygen versus pH, for example, in the central part of Peru, and going from offshore to onshore, it's very remarkable the similarity of the profiles, but also the similarity of the depth of the oxycline and the depth of the pH cline. So the two clines are very close and occur together along this cross-shore section. If we want to take a closer look and not only in one point but in a section, we have as an example this data that comes from a stock assessment cruise by MARPE during the summer and early autumn of 2015. And here we can see the temperature on the top row, then the dissolved oxygen and the pH, and finally the saturation state for aragonite. And from left to right, we go from north to the south. Paita in the north, Pisco at 14 degrees south. And you can see that in the central and the southern sections, the position of the oxycline is shallower, and the values of the pH are lower, and the pH cline is also shallower. But in addition, the profile of the omega of aragonite is shallower as well. I mean, the saturation horizon of omega is very close to the surface, about 20 meters of water depth in Callao, and in Pisco about 40 or 50 meters of water depth, but exhibiting this inclination, which is a signature of the coastal upwelling. This is a study that was made by one of the colleagues here, Martin Hernandez Ayón, And he described very nicely mesoscale features on the distribution of oceanographic parameters and some variables related with the carbon system. Here we can see the partial pressure of CO2, the pH, and the omega of aragonite. And it's interesting because this is not a very big area. It's just about 400 nautical miles in latitude and about probably 100 or maybe 60 miles from the shore to offshore. But within this region, we can see differences between the northern area and the southern area, for example. It's clear that from Huacho to Pisco, upwelling is more active. So we can measure lower temperatures at, I think this was at 30 meters water depth. And the waters are also heavier because of the shoaling of the pycnocline, and oxygen is lower, and the partial pressure of CO2 is much higher, pH is lower, and the value of omega is lower as well, reaching values as low as 1.2. That is very close to the saturation horizon at 30 meters water depth. So unfortunately, the systematic measurements of pH and the variables of the carbonate system are scarce in our region. In IMARPE, we have started to measure these variables in a more systematic way just in the past 5 to 10 years. So we do not have a long time series to describe the interannual or the multi-annual variability. But we can have some ideas or some insights on the seasonal and interannual changes by, for example, comparing cruises that took place during summer, during winter under neutral ENSO conditions, or during winter under El Niño conditions. So if we compare these two cruises, one in summer and one in winter, it's very clear that there are differences both in the average values of pH, but also in the variance of the pH values in the same region. In summer, we have some spots of very high values of pH, and these spots are related with the occurrence of harmful algal blooms. And while in winter, the values are much more homogeneous, but also the average is lower. So we could say that for this region in summer, under neutral conditions, the mean pH is around 8.2, and in winter, under neutral conditions, is about 7.9, so there is 0.3 values of pH of difference in terms of the average between summer and winter. And during an El Niño, but in winter, the mean pH is higher than the mean pH during a neutral period, but in the same seasonal time. So we have to take into account, of course, that these pH measurements are NBS pH, so there could be a bias in the values, but we are confident that the patterns in terms of the spatial distribution and also in terms of the temporal variation would hold even if we have measured the pH with a more sophisticated way. There are some time series that have been started looking at the variables of the carbonate system in the Callao area. For example, this time series is from 2017 to 2019. There were two important climatic periods. At the beginning of 2017, we have the coastal El Niño, which was, actually it was a marine heat wave, but which had a strong impact in the warming of the surface layers. And at the end of 2017 and until autumn of 2018, we had a La Niña, which was a moderate to a strong La Niña event. And so the temperature clearly shows the occurrence of these two events. Dissolved oxygen has more complex variability. But if we look at the pH, the periods where the thermocline was shallower during La Niña also was characterized by lower pH near the surface. And the saturation state of aragonite shows the same behavior. The saturation horizon actually reached the surface in the peak of the La Niña in 2017-2018. And in other periods, it also can reach very shallow depths. And normally this happens during winter and spring, where the upwelling regime is stronger. So what about the more coastal embayments? Because this station that I have just shown you is a station that is at about 10 miles to the coast. But if we look at the bays, for example, Paracas Bay, which is an important bay because of multiple economic activities that are happening here, even aquaculture and farming areas inside the bay, we have detected even lower values of pH here. For example, in the bottom water of this bay, values as low as 7.5 or 7.6 are measured during summer, whereby the oxygen concentrations are very low as well. So during summer, when the productivity is very high and near the coast, this signature is even stronger, we can get these conditions of very low oxygen and very low pH at the same time. And this, of course, can have important implications for the animals that are inhabiting these places. So now, what do we know at this point about the consequences of low pH conditions on calcifying organisms of this system? There are some studies in progress. One of these is by Diana Alvites. I think she has presented a poster in this conference. And this figure is kind of a summary of her findings. She studied the community of coccolithophorids across the Callao upwelling area, from near the coast to 50 miles away. And in this spatial scale, we go from the inside the upwelling cell to the subtropical waters. And she found differences in the biodiversity. The number of species of coccolithophorids is higher in the subtropical waters and is very low or non-existent within the upwelling cell. This is one feature that she found. But the second feature that she found is that for those species that could inhabit the whole area, the thickness of the cocospheres were greater in the more acidic environment. These numbers that you see here are actually the average pH values that were measured during her study. So in the subtropical waters, the average was 8.0, but in the inner shelf, it was 7.5 or even lower. And here, the very few coccolithophores that were observed had this feature of enhanced calcification. There are other ongoing studies looking at the biodiversity of other calcifying plantic organisms. And some of them are, I think, are presented in this conference. For example, Kesken has studied the onshore-offshore biodiversity changes of holoplanktonic mollusks, and he had found the same biodiversity change pattern from the warm and normal pH waters offshore to the cooler and acidic waters inshore. Other researchers, as Maldonado, has made the same kind of exploration for planktonic foraminifera. And there are other ongoing studies on the calcification responses under acidic conditions for benthic foraminifera, and there is a poster by Denis Romero in this conference. So that is in terms of the biodiversity, but in terms of the influence on the physiology or the calcification rate, there have been some studies, and they are still ongoing, looking at the effect of low pH conditions on the scallop Argopecten purpuratus, which is the main benthic resource in the Peruvian coastal waters. One of these studies measured the response in growth and calcification to experimental conditions at a pH value of 7.8, which is characteristic of the upwelling waters here, versus a pH of 7.4, which is rather extreme, but that could occur in very organic rich sediments in some cases. Well, what she found, Katy Córdoba Rodriguez, what she found is that there was a difference in the growth of these mollusks under more acidic conditions than less acidic conditions. And they also found a difference in the net calcification rate. So there was a lower net calcification rate for the low pH treatment, and there was a higher dissolution rate for the shells in the low pH treatment as well. And both of these differences were significant in terms of statistics. Other studies have started to look at the combination of stressors. For example, these results by Cueto come from a study where they explored the influence of both low pH and low oxygen in the shell calcification, feeding, and survival of these pectinids. And they found that the ocean acidification treatment had a very significant impact on survival, on shell calcification, and on the feeding rate of these animals. Well, I don't know how long time am I? Oh, okay, I have to end. Okay, so I will pass this very rapidly. Future scenarios of ocean acidification in the Humboldt Current system. There have been some studies about that. The big picture is that it is expected that within this century, the top 60 meters, that is the inner shelf areas, would be occupied by undersaturated waters most of the time, and this is irrespective of a pessimistic or an optimistic scenario. So we are going on that direction according to this study. But we know that the climate change has its own complexities depending on the variable that you are looking at. So we have to take into account as well what will happen with the oxygenation and what will happen in terms of the strength of upwelling and how all of these factors will combine in terms of even enhance the acidification scenario or perhaps compensate at least partially this acidification scenario that the models are saying to us now. So this is my last slide, just to give a very quick remarks on the gaps, challenges, and opportunities for ocean acidification studies in the Northern Humboldt Current ecosystem. In terms of observation, actually, we need to improve and strengthen and standardize the measurements of pH and carbon system variables. There are some ongoing efforts on that direction, but we certainly need to do much more. And we have to ensure long-term observatories of these variables. And perhaps one strategy could be to look at the cross-shore, but also at the latitudinal gradients, because both of them are telling us part of the story. In terms of the biological, ecological impacts and adaptations, I think we have to deepen into the morphological, genetic, and metabolic traits of the marine calcifiers in the region. As I said at the beginning, this is a hotspot of acid and waters in the global ocean. And we certainly would expect that marine calcifiers here should have important adaptations that we need to study and understand. Of course, continue and improve the multi-stressor experiments. There are some very good and promising efforts that are being done for the scallops. And another issue that could be interesting as well is to look at the paleoenvironmental reconstructions to identify the mechanisms that could cause elevated carbonate dissolution for example, in the regional sediment records. We have observed this in other type of studies, long sequences of sedimentary records where there are not preserved carbonates, and we need to figure out if this is something related with change in the water mass or if it's something related with the flux of organic matter or another diagenetic cause, for example. In terms of modeling, there are many studies being done now, but for different variables. Maybe it's time now to have a more articulated strategy to look at the linkages between one variable to another variable and how do they combine, if they have synergistic effects or antagonistic effects in terms of the ocean acidification. And finally, for networking and international collaborations, well, this is more like, it's not a gap, it's not a challenge, I say, it's an opportunity to improve the articulation to several international programs and agencies like LAOCA, Remarco, and the Ocean Foundation. And we as IMARPE, as a state institution, have kind of the mission to provide the reports for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal related with acidification. So I think that would be all from my part. I'm sorry for taking too long time. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah. Thank you, Dimitri. Very, very nice talk. Well, some of the point in the previous keynote, he was mentioned, that we don't have too much time for changes that are occurring in the coastal ocean. So considering that we already have evidence in Peru and part of Chile that the upwelling regimes are changing, in terms of the intensity and the durations. So from your perspective, the carbon chemistry in the coastal zone for this kind of eastern boundary system are going to expect, changes more frequently due to the impact of climate, changes in the upwelling regimes or the long term of ocean acidification. It's just a question because probably we have less time than expected.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, it seems that all the elements of the cocktail are going to that scenario as you are describing, but we still need to be a bit careful in the interpretation of these trends. For example, the cooling trend along the Peruvian coast, I don't know if this is the same mechanism for the Chilean coast, but it seems to be that the main mechanism that is causing this cooling trend is not an enhancement of coastal winds, but is the mode of variability of the equatorial remote forcing. But at the end, that mechanism, what is causing is to favor a shoaling of the thermocline. And this shoaling of the thermocline would be the cause of the cooling in the surface. But we know that all the elements that we have described already and all the studies that this shoaling of the thermocline should also imply a shoaling of the pH cline or a shoaling of the omega of aragonite as well. So in terms of the trends, I think it's very clear. It's the same in the case for oxygen. The trends are very clear, showing the oxygenation variability in the upper part of the oxygen minimum zone. That is the region where you have the highest biological activity and biological transformation in the water column. And that should lead to an enhanced CO2 production there. And again, that would contribute even more to the acidification. But these are trends. When we compare the trends with the scenarios, that is a bit tricky because the scenarios for the future indicate that this cooling trend will not hold. We should shift to a warming trend. We should shift to enhancing stratification in the upper part of the water column. How this stratification would affect the acidification features, I don't know. Probably this deserves a lot of study and research. And it's the same for oxygen. Well, there is a very big uncertainty globally and how the oxygenation will be distributed regionally. And our region is one of the more problematic regions in terms of figure out what will happen with oxygen. So it's a bit difficult to respond, but up to now, all the trends are leading us to a closer how to say this, that we will reach sooner this tipping point, just based on the trends.
Gracias. Hola, hola. Testing. Testing, testing. Hola.
I would like to follow up on that last statement that you made. Do you think there is at least enough data or sufficient data to get a sense of the trends over decadal timelines? Can we kind of look over the past 40 or 50 years and see what, say, like the wind field is, and utilize that to get some prediction that you might want to have, or drive the models in order to get at what the decadal changes might be?
Yeah, very, very good point. Of course, the interdecadal variability is, I didn't mention this in the talk, but it's another player. We have looked at sediment records of Peru and also of northern Chile, and it's very clear that there are regime shifts at multi-decadal time periods, at centennial time periods, and this, of course, should have an impact on the acidification as well. I mentioned this observation that we have observed very long sedimentary sequences where we do not find any preserved calcareous animal. We don't find any preserved calcareous fossil. No forams, no coccoliths. So this dissolution is, why is this occurring? The last regime shift of these characteristics was at about the mid-1850s, which happened to be the transition between the Little Ice Age to the current warm period. So this transition was also a transition in terms of upwelling intensity and in terms of oxygenation. And it was also a transition in terms of the preservation of carbonates. So the Little Ice period was low productivity regime, low upwelling regime, but also a poor preservation of carbonates regime. So yes, this decadal and multi-decadal variability exists. And for the past 50 or 60 years, I think we have a good amount of data at IMARPE, because since the institute was created, our mission has been to measure at least the core oceanographic variables in order to complement the information for the stock assessment duties. So, and we have observed that during this time window, the signatures related with the PDO, for example. So I could not rule out that this cooling that I said was actually perhaps a mixed signature of something related with a decadal period, but also maybe related with a longer trend.
Just a short comment. Thank you, Dimitri, for your... No problem, thank you.
Okay.
Hello. Okay. Hi, doctor. I just want to point out that all the information that we have from IMARPE, for example, are far from the coast. So are these trends or what we saw in the images related or can be applied for the coastal for the coastal zones? Because when we are, for example, from the university, we monitor very near the shore, almost 5 miles from the shore, and we found very different measurements. Mm-hmm. So maybe after this, we can point out that we need more information, maybe from the coastal laboratories of IMARPE, like working together to measure the coastal zones. Like the Paracas example was really nice because it was like exploring the whole bay, but we should do that for every bay and every coast, no?
Yeah, of course, you are right. Yeah, we suspect that, that in the base, the conditions are more extreme and more variable. And I think we have enough data to sustain that. I mean, to sustain that, to support that statement. But it is true that we do not have the same kind of systematic effort on monitoring base as we do for the Neritic area. That's a reality, yes. Okay.
Thanks for the very interesting talks. I have a question about marine calcifiers and the observations that you have done in this very complex and interesting region. So we have seen similar response, for example, for coccolithophores in the California current systems, where you see an increase in mass of coccolithophores, where you have actually low pH. So my question was more about information that we need in order to understand a bit more about the impact of calcifiers. And I was wondering if you have any data on production, for example. So in terms of carbonate production and export production at the seasonal scale or a semi-seasonal scale. And also, because you show this plot where you see the increasing chlorophyll concentration in this time series, they didn't match so much with the oxygen concentrations. And I was wondering if you have any indication about this increase in chlorophyll concentration in the production of, I don't know, phytoplankton, coccolithophorous diatoms, and so on.
Yeah, well, thank you for your questions. Well, in terms of the primary production observations, I'm afraid we do not have direct measurements of that. We mostly rely on model estimates based on the satellite data. There are some old information from the 70s when they were actual fixation rates, primary productivity measurements. But recently, in the past 20, 30 years, I would say that most of the estimations are by models. And about the variability of oxygen and chlorophyll A, this long-term variability, well, yeah, that is in some ways the same kind of question that we ask ourselves. What is true is that the variability of oxygen, if we use the oxycline depth as a proxy, and the variability of chlorophyll A are not in the same cycle or in the same band. For oxycline, we see this interdecadal variability, but for chlorophyll A, we have a long-term trend. And it's interesting that when we look at the sediment records for the past 200 years, for example, we also observe this higher accumulation rate of total organic carbon or biomarkers for the past 50 to 100 years. So it seems to be that is a very long-term signature, but actually we have not studied the mechanisms that cause this. Mm-hmm.
People who need to download, please be close to the people with the computer for the room. we hope so to be recovering sometime. Okay, we're going to start at 10:30. Okay, 10:30. We're going to start. Thank you.
Can you hear me? SOS. Two times click and I'm acting low. I can feel your love pulling me up from the underground. I don't need my drug. We could be more than just part-time lovers. I can feel your love picking me up from the underground. I don't need my drug. We could be more than just part-time lovers. Part-time lovers. I can feel your love. We could be more than just part-time lovers. I can feel your love. We could be more than just part-time lovers. I can feel your love. We could be more than just part-time lovers.